I hadn't been inside that warehouse for more than 40 minutes when I saw a man gripping a steel rack with both hands shaking so hard his knuckles turned white. He whispered to the supervisor that he needed the bathroom. The supervisor didn't even look up from his clipboard. He just said flat and cold, "You break the pace, you break the team. Hold it." The man didn't move. His breathing went uneven, and then without any sound he collapsed to his knees. Nobody rushed to him. Nobody shouted for help. People just stared straight ahead, eyes empty, working faster as if speeding up would erase what they'd just witnessed. I stood a few feet away pretending to sort packages, forced to watch him struggle to stay conscious on the concrete floor. And in that moment, one thought hit me harder than anything else. If this is happening in my building, then what else have I missed? My name is Kyle Mercer, and 3 days before that moment I was sitting in a quiet office on the top floor of the company I built. You wouldn't have recognized me in that warehouse. No tailored shirt, no polished shoes, just a cheap hoodie, old boots, and a badge with a fake name printed on laminate. I was nobody there, and everyone treated me like nothing. The decision to go undercover happened after a message appeared in my inbox, a simple anonymous line. "If you really care about your people, come see how we're treated." No context, no signature, no anger in the writing which somehow made it hit harder. I read it, then read it again and found myself staring at the empty hallway outside my office. The silence felt heavier than usual. For weeks I'd sensed something was wrong. Turnover climbing productivity charts, smoothing out in ways that didn't make sense. Reports from regional managers repeating identical phrases like they'd been copied from the same script. But nothing prepared me for seeing that worker on his knees on the concrete. His name was Luis. I learned that later. In that first hour, all I knew was that he was trying not to cry in front of people who were trained intentionally or not to pretend he wasn't there. The supervisor, a man named Grant Huxley, finally approached him. His steps were slow, not out of concern but annoyance. He crouched slightly, just enough so their eyes were level, and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "If you can't keep pace, clock out. We don't carry dead weight." Luis tried to push himself upright, fingers slipping on the floor. Grant didn't help him. He just turned and walked away. That was my welcome to the warehouse I owned. If you've ever worked a job where you felt erased, where your pain didn't register to the people above you, where you learned to survive by staying silent, I want you to recognize that feeling here. It matters. It's exactly what everyone in that building felt the moment I met them. And for anyone who's been there, I hope hearing this opens a space to talk. If you've ever lived something similar, I'd appreciate hearing your experience. Sometimes sharing it helps more than people realize. I stayed in my assigned lane, lifting and sorting, pretending not to see the looks passing between workers. They weren't talking, not verbally. Their eyes did all the speaking. Don't draw attention. Don't ask questions. Don't slow down. Don't need anything. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it stands quietly at your shoulder and reminds you to keep your head down. That warehouse was full of quiet fear. Even though it had been years since I'd worked a labor job, slipping into the rhythm came back faster than I expected. It made me sick to think muscle memory outlasts dignity. But the moments that really cut were the ones where I saw how people reacted to me, how they measured me, dismissed me, avoided me. Nobody asked my name. Nobody asked if I needed help. Nobody even acknowledged me unless I accidentally blocked their path. I wasn't the CEO to them. I wasn't even a human being. I was just another pair of hands to fill quota charts they never saw for standards they never agreed to. Grant walked past me 3 times without a single glance. The warehouse line moved like a river. He stood above, never entering, never touching the cold water rushing beneath him. The clipboard in his hand wasn't a tool. It was a barrier. At one point, a teenage worker named Jonah dropped a box because his arms were shaking. Grant's voice boomed through the aisle. "If you can't carry 20 pounds, you shouldn't be here." Jonah didn't argue. He didn't lift his head. He just picked up the box and moved faster. 2 workers beside me exchanged a look, one quick, one empty, and went right back to their tasks. No one comforted him. Not because they didn't care, but because comforting him might draw attention. The air in that aisle felt like something pressing down on everyone's lungs, flattening any instinct to speak up. I kept lifting, stacking, moving. My heartbeat had its own rhythm. Every time I looked up, more injustice surfaced in cold details. A woman holding her stomach, afraid to ask for a break. A man limping on one leg, ignored by everyone, even when he grimaced with each step. Grant timing people with his watch, not for quality, just for speed. Workers glancing at the bathroom door like it was a forbidden place. Everyone wearing expressions I'd only seen in people trying to make it through one more day. What hurt most wasn't the physical strain. It was the atmosphere of erasure. I was the founder of that company. I had spent years building it with a belief that people should matter. And yet, standing in that warehouse, I couldn't have felt more invisible. During break, which was exactly 10 minutes, nobody sat. They didn't have enough time to. People leaned against pallets or crouched beside crates. They didn't talk. They didn't eat. Most just tried to catch their breath. I reached for a water fountain mounted near the corner, but the moment I pressed the button, the worker beside me murmured, "Not during shift flow." I glanced at him. He didn't look angry, just tired. "He'll mark it against you," he said. "Grant." He nodded once. That was when I realized the truth. These people weren't working against a machine. They were working against a man, and they were losing. The rest of the shift, Grant kept walking behind people without warning. He didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. Presence alone was enough to tighten spines and speed up hands. When I lifted a box wrong and grunted from a sharp pull in my side, he paused right behind me. I didn't turn to look, but I felt his eyes slide over me, cold, dismissive, calculating. Then he walked away. I'd once believed the worst kind of injustice was delivered through violence or screaming. I was wrong. The worst kind is delivered through indifference, quiet, constant, unrelenting indifference that wears people down until they forget they deserve better. I won't lie, by the end of that first hour, I was angry. Not a loud anger, a still one, the kind that sits behind your ribs and grows heavier with every breath. And if you've ever felt pushed aside or dismissed in a place where you were supposed to matter, you'll understand that feeling. If any part of this reminds you of something you've lived through, you're welcome to stay here with me while I keep telling this story. Some people hit that subscribe button just to follow along with stories that finally put words to what they've been carrying. If that feels right for you, I'm glad you're here. Near the end of the shift, a worker named Reese, an older man with deep lines around his eyes, leaned close enough to whisper without moving his lips. "If you want to see the truth," he said, "don't go home. Stay for the night crew." I didn't answer. I just nodded slightly and kept stacking boxes. Around us, the conveyor hummed. People moved with practiced urgency. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Grant stood at the far end of the aisle, checking the pace again, tapping his pen against his clipboard while pretending not to stare. And beneath all that noise, something else hung in the air. An understanding shared between every worker in that building. "You're not allowed to be human here." I kept working, trying not to let my expression reveal anything. I wasn't supposed to care. I wasn't supposed to notice. I wasn't supposed to exist beyond my hands and the task in front of me. But I saw everything. Every look, every flinch, every moment a worker swallowed their needs to survive another minute. And I knew I wasn't leaving when the shift ended. Not after what I'd seen. Not after the collapse. Not after the quiet warning. Whatever was happening in that warehouse, the real hidden truth of it, I was going to see it with my own eyes. I had built this company, but I no longer recognized it. And that was the part that cut deepest. The warehouse changed after sunset. Not gradually. Not subtly. It was like someone flipped a hidden switch the moment the day shift clocked out. The noise lowered, but the tension sharpened. The rhythm wasn't hurried the way it had been earlier. It was efficient, cold, almost surgical. People didn't speak. They didn't even glance at one another. They moved like they'd been trained to disappear. I stayed behind exactly the way Reese told me to, quiet, unnoticed, another nameless body in a hoodie, trying to blend into the shadows near the loading docks. The air felt colder at night, not because of temperature, but because the warmth of ordinary human behavior had drained out of the building. 2 supervisors were on duty. Neither of them was Grant. One was a woman with tight hair pulled into a knot. Eyes constantly scanning the clipped precision of someone who believed every misstep was a threat to her authority. Her badge said, "Hail." The other was a broad-shouldered man named Rogan, the type whose silence carried more threat than raised voices. He didn't look at workers. He looked through them. His presence alone made the air feel thinner. The night crew wasn't large, maybe 20 people yet. The space felt full, not from noise but from the pressure everyone carried in their movements. The stacking here was faster, the checks stricter, the rules harder. If the day shift operated on exhaustion, the night shift operated on fear. I kept moving boxes, working in rhythm watching, learning. It didn't take long for the first sign of something wrong to surface. About 20 minutes in, a woman named Tara tapped Rogan's shoulder with a kind of terrified politeness, like someone approaching a sleeping animal. "My hands are locking up," she murmured. "Just need a minute to stretch." Rogan didn't turn his head. He didn't blink. He just said, "Stretch on your own time." She stood still, stunned, for half a second, then shook out her hands silently and kept working. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the next box. I felt an instinct to step forward to say something, but I forced myself still. One wrong move and the entire undercover purpose would collapse. I needed information, not confrontation. But watching her work with hands that barely obeyed her, it scraped against everything inside me. The next sign came when a younger worker, maybe 19, shifted his weight in discomfort and subtly moved toward the restroom door. He didn't even touch the handle. Hale barked across the aisle. "You leave your station, you get written up." He froze instantly. The restroom door might as well have been an alarm trigger. I kept my voice flat low. "What happens if someone needs a break?" A worker beside me, narrow-shouldered, dark circles under his eyes, didn't look my way as he answered. "You wait." "How long?" "As long as they say. And if you can't wait," his jaw tightened, "then you learn." He didn't say learn what. He didn't have to. The fear in his voice said it for him. The injustice wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was a quiet elimination of basic needs happening in plain sight. At the far end of the aisle, I watched Tara blink rapidly, her hands trembling harder. A box slipped from her grip and hit the floor with a thud. She gasped quietly, "Fear, not pain." Hale stormed toward her. "You drop pace again, you're off the schedule." Tara nodded too fast, swallowing panic, bending to lift the box with hands that shouldn't have been lifting anything. I scanned the faces around me. No one reacted. No one stepped in. Everyone's eyes were trained on their tasks, backs stiff, movements mechanical. That kind of silence doesn't come from training. It comes from conditioning. These weren't mistakes of the system. They were habits. Habits shaped by people who believed pressure was a form of control. The shift continued with the same relentless rhythm. But something unexpected happened, a moment so small most people would have missed it. Reese stepped beside me quietly. He didn't look at me, didn't change his pace, didn't let his face reflect anything. But he spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "They take people off the clock for bathroom breaks." I didn't respond. I just kept stacking. "Off the clock." "Yep." His voice stayed quiet. "Supervisor clocks them out manually if someone insists on going. 10 minutes lost pay, sometimes more." "That legal?" His jaw flexed. "What's legal here doesn't matter. What's enforced does." A forklift beeped loudly somewhere behind us. Hale snapped at someone for calling out the wrong bin. Rogan docked 2 workers to the unloading lane, a punishment disguised as reassignment. And Reese kept moving his hands one box after another, his voice barely a thread of sound. Grant started it. Night crew perfected it. I said nothing. But inside, something tightened with an almost physical snap. The anonymous message, the collapsing worker, the whispers during break, the glances toward the bathroom like it was forbidden. Everything connected. The warehouse wasn't failing. It was suffocating. And the people inside it had been taught to normalize the suffocation. Halfway through the shift, I caught Hale staring at me. Not casually, not in passing. She paused mid-stride, eyes narrowing, expression flat and assessing. I felt her evaluating my pace, my posture, how often I blinked the slight stiffness from the earlier pull in my side. For one chilling second, I thought she recognized me. Then she called out, "You, hooded one, pick up speed. We're not crawling tonight." I nodded and moved faster. The frustration burned in the back of my throat, but I held it down. Being treated like nothing was the only way to see everything. But as I picked up the next box, something flicked in my peripheral vision. The bathroom door, locked. A physical padlock attached through a metal latch. A laminated sign hanging beside it. Bathroom available during official break periods only. Break periods scheduled and supervised. Unauthorized use equals immediate disciplinary action. My blood went cold. Not figuratively, physically. I had to keep my breathing measured. Had to keep my hands steady. Had to pretend I hadn't just found the clearest evidence that everything was even darker than the day crew hinted. I swallowed once, quietly. Reese didn't look up when he whispered, "That's why people won't drink water here." That explained the dry lips, the slow swallowing motions, the silent endurance. It wasn't the work that drained them. It was the rules built to push them beyond what their bodies could tolerate. And I realized something else. Grant didn't create these systems alone. Someone above him had approved them. Someone had built this entire structure of pressure that I had never seen because I had been behind glass walls and filtered reports. The shame rose before the anger did. Quiet, heavy, hard to swallow. If you've ever been blindsided by the realization that the people you trusted abused that trust, you'll understand why the next few minutes felt like a blur. I kept working, but every sense sharpened at once, like the warehouse had shifted focus. Every detail felt more precise, more threatening, more wrong. The night crew wasn't under strict rules. They were under control. A woman named Kendra tapped Hale to ask if she could get a bandage from the supply drawer. Hale didn't even pretend to care. "If you're bleeding bad, mop it. If it's small, keep working." Kendra lowered her hand quickly, pressing her sleeve against a fresh cut. Rogan took a break to check the night register and mentioned something about score penalties for anyone who slipped below pace. A few workers stiffened at the words. The worst part wasn't the cruelty, it was the normalization. Everything here was delivered with the tone of routine, not punishment. That subtlety made it monstrous. Around midnight, the conveyor paused for maintenance for 3 minutes. The warehouse went still, eerily still. And in that stillness, I heard something I hadn't expected. Breathing, all around me, shallow, uneven, strained, like people trying to fill their lungs for the first time in hours. When the machines restarted, everyone straightened instantly. A kind of synchronized bracing. No one said a word. I understood then why workers stayed silent even when things went wrong. They weren't scared of losing their jobs. They were scared of losing the tiny bit of stability that kept them afloat, paychecks they desperately needed, schedules that barely sustained them, health that had already cost them too much. And for many, speaking up wasn't just risky, it was impossible. At one point, something clattered near the loading dock. A metal bin tipped over. The young worker who'd knocked it down flinched so hard he nearly tripped, backing away. Rogan didn't raise his voice. He didn't approach quickly. He walked over, slowly placed the bin upright, looked at the kid without blinking and said, "You repeat that mistake, you lose your shift." The kid nodded, mute. Fear doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from the absence of it. Hours passed like that, no variation, no relief. The tasks blurred, but the atmosphere only tightened. Near the final stretch of the shift, Reese spoke again, barely audible. "I don't know who sent that message to you." I froze for a half second. "What message?" His voice didn't waver, "The one that told you to come here." I kept stacking. "You think I got a message?" I think someone was desperate enough to try anything. I kept my expression flat, my pace steady. "You think I look like someone who could fix things?" He didn't answer immediately. His breath hitched, slightly exhaustion, fear, or something harder to name. "Sometimes the right stranger shows up," he said. "And sometimes that's enough." We didn't say another word. But the truth sat between us, unspoken. Someone had reached out. Someone had risked their job, everything, to expose what was happening. Someone believed I could do something. When the shift finally ended, people didn't talk or stretch or breathe relief. They just walked off the floor, heads down, moving like they were carrying the night out on their backs. As I stepped toward the exit, I caught one last sight of the locked restroom door. The padlock gleamed under the fluorescent lights, small, metal, ordinary. But everything inside me reacted to it. That padlock wasn't just a rule, it was a symbol. The clearest possible proof that dignity had been removed from this place, one rule at a time. And what I felt in that instant was simple. It wasn't going to stay locked for long. The next evening I arrived earlier than the night crew. The sun hadn't fully set, and the cafeteria still had a few day shift workers lingering over vending machine snacks. Their conversation was low, exhausted, half-hearted as they waited for rides home. My hoodie was pulled low, hands tucked into pockets, trying to look like another nobody coming in early for extra hours. I took a seat near the corner where I could observe without being seen. The air smelled of reheated noodles and stale coffee, but the mood felt heavier than yesterday. People weren't talking about sports scores or weekend plans. They were whispering. Every few words, someone glanced toward the hallway leading to the warehouse floor. Something was unsettling them. Something new. A man at the nearest table muttered, "Did you hear about Mateo?" The woman beside him stiffened. "Keep your voice down." "It's not gossip," he said quietly. He passed out. They had to call emergency services. My grip tightened inside my pocket. The woman whispered, "It happened in front of Hale." She told everyone to keep pace while he was on the ground. The man exhaled sharply. "I heard he asked to go to the restroom 3 times before that." A subtle tremor ran up the back of my neck. Not surprise, confirmation. The thing you fear most isn't learning something terrible. It's learning that the terrible thing wasn't an exaggeration, that it was the truth restrained only by the limits of human endurance. I stood, pretending to stretch my back, adjusting my position to observe without drawing attention. More workers trickled into the cafeteria. Some carried energy drinks. Some carried nothing but fatigue. But they all carried the same quiet dread. 10 minutes before shift start, Reese walked in. His posture was tight, shoulders raised slightly as if bracing for a blow that hadn't yet landed. He locked eyes with me only for a second. That was all he needed. It wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. He sat at a table with 2 others. They whispered fast, barely moving their mouths. The atmosphere felt like the moments before a storm when the wind is still, but the pressure makes your skin itch. I slipped out ahead of them and entered the warehouse. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the machines humming at idle speed. Hale stood near the supervisor's desk, arms crossed, eyes scanning the space with a rigidity that suggested she was waiting for someone to challenge her authority. Rogan was adjusting pallets near the dock, his expression unreadable as always. As the rest of the crew filed in, the entire warehouse seemed to fold in on itself. Conversations died. Movement became cautious. Everyone kept glancing at Hale's shoes rather than her face. Something had happened here, and everyone was pretending not to know what. Reese approached me quietly while checking a scanner battery. His voice barely moved the air. He collapsed right there. His chin lifted slightly, indicating a faint stain on the concrete near Conveyor Unit 6. My stomach dropped. It wasn't blood, just the remains of spilled water and disinfectant, but the implication was enough. "What happened afterward?" I asked quietly, still adjusting my gloves. "He was taken to the ER. They said dehydration." I kept my face neutral. "Is he coming back?" Reese didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Grant arrived late carrying a clipboard and the kind of brittle smile that told me he was here to perform command, not embody it. Workers stiffened automatically. Even Hale lowered her gaze for a moment. Grant clapped once. "Everyone, let's tighten things up tonight. Yesterday's metrics dipped." The cruelty of the words sat inside my chest like ice. Yesterday wasn't a metric problem. Yesterday was a medical emergency. Grant continued, voice-clipped, "Restroom access remains regulated until we're back on target." There it was, said out loud, not disguised, not coded, not whispered from worker to worker. A rule spoken openly by a manager who fully believed it was normal. "Pace goals have increased by 3%. He added, as though Mateo collapsing had created an inconvenience rather than a warning. No one spoke. No one objected. Everyone moved to their stations. I moved with them. But the weight in my chest was heavier tonight. The shift began. Boxes thudded along the conveyor. Forklifts beeped in rhythmic patterns. Pallets slid across polished floors. But beneath it all was a tension so thick it distorted the air. Fear, grief, rage all pressed down so hard that it could only escape in tiny cracks. A worker at aisle 3 dropped a box because his hands were shaking. Hale told him to focus or clear out. Another worker, an older man with visible back pain, slowed to stretch for half a second. Rogan snapped at him to straighten up and protect the KPI flow. Every moment had a cold edge. The kind of edge that comes from management who sees people not as people but as variables in a spreadsheet. About an hour in, the strain finally broke through. A loud thud echoed from the far end of the warehouse. A stack of bins wobbled, one clattering onto the floor beside a worker named Dylan. He stepped back too fast, stumbling into a pallet, catching himself just in time. Rogan strode toward him, voice sharp. "You lose control of inventory again and you're off the roster." "I didn't," Dylan started. You didn't keep pace? Rogan cut him off. That's all that matters. The injustice hit like a punch not because Dylan was innocent, but because his fear was louder than the fact he almost got hurt. People aren't supposed to learn how to swallow fear. Not like that. Not every night. Not because of something as simple as needing a restroom or a moment to breathe. I forced my hands to keep moving boxes, but my mind was turning connecting threads I hadn't noticed before. This wasn't just poor management. It wasn't just cruelty. It wasn't just policy gone wrong. It was culture. A culture that had evolved over time, fostered, protected, enforced. By whom? Grant. Someone above him. Someone who saw high productivity and never asked how it was achieved. Or was it me, the owner, who hadn't looked close enough? The thought cut deeper than anything Hale or Rogan could have said. Around 2 hours into the shift, the first incident happened. A worker named Nico froze at his station, one hand on a box, his breath short and shaky. I saw the signs instantly, not of defiance, but of someone reaching the limit of holding themselves together. He pressed a hand to his stomach, glancing once toward the restroom door. Locked, still forbidden. Hale noticed him. "What's the issue?" she asked, not concerned, just irritated. Nico swallowed hard. "I just need a minute." Hale crossed her arms. "You can meet on break. It's urgent." His voice cracked at the edge. "That sounds like a personal planning problem," she said coolly. "Get back to station." The entire aisle stiffened. Everyone kept their eyes low, but their posture betrayed the tension. I heard my voice before I could stop it. "How long until break?" Hale turned sharply. "You're not the one asking." "I'm asking," I said, keeping my tone flat, steady. Her eyes tightened. "Break is scheduled when it's scheduled. It comes when it comes." My heartbeat pulsed once in my ears, but I stayed quiet. I wasn't here to blow my cover in a moment of anger. I was here to understand everything, every rule, every cruelty, every justification. After a few tense seconds, Nico forced himself to move again. But his hands were trembling. Every motion was forced. Every second felt like torture for him. Reese whispered at my side. "Don't draw attention. They'll target you. I can handle myself. You can't handle getting fired." I didn't respond, not because he was wrong, but because his fear was real. The next collapse came 20 minutes later. There was no warning, no sound that signaled it, no mistake that preceded it. Just a sudden sickening thump, a body hitting the concrete. A woman named June crumpled beside the packaging lane. Her hands twitched once, then went still. For a second, the warehouse froze. Total silence. The kind that cracks something open inside you. Then Hale shouted, "Keep pace, medical is on the way." No one moved toward June. Not one supervisor knelt beside her. Not one co-worker dared break formation. Everyone stayed at their stations like soldiers under threat. Grant walked briskly toward her, but not with concern. His voice was hard. "What happened?" Rogan answered. She slowed down just before it happened. Grant cursed under his breath. "We're already behind metrics." I stared at him, disbelief burning through me. A woman was unconscious, possibly injured, possibly worse, and all he saw was numbers. 2 workers dragged a folding stretcher from the supply room. Hale told them to make it quick, as though they were tidying a spill. June's head lolled slightly as they lifted her, her hair brushing the floor. No one asked if she was okay. No one checked her pulse. She was removed from the warehouse in under 30 seconds. No humanity, no dignity, no pause. Once she cleared the doorway, Grant clapped his hands once. Everyone back on schedule. And just like that, the machines resumed. The boxes flowed. The workers moved. The warehouse swallowed the moment whole as if nothing had happened. But I felt something shift, not in the room, but inside my own chest. A line had been crossed. A point had been reached that couldn't be stepped back from. When I lifted the next box, my hands felt steady, too steady. A cold clarity settled over me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. The culture of cruelty here wasn't accidental. It wasn't misguided. It wasn't the product of one bad supervisor. This was systemic, embedded, protected, engineered. And no matter how quiet I played it, no matter how deeply I buried my identity, no matter how well I blended into the background, this warehouse was going to expose itself to me piece by piece, whether the managers wanted it to or not, through the rhythm of the conveyor, through the locked bathroom door, through the way people flinched when supervisors walked by, through the collapsed bodies. It kept revealing the truth hour by hour, and the night wasn't over. I didn't sleep when the shift ended. Most of the workers dragged themselves toward the exit. Eyes, heavy steps, unsteady, each of them carrying something invisible on their backs. Fear, exhaustion, resignation, maybe all three at once. They didn't talk. They didn't even look at one another. They left the building like shadows at the end of a long night. I stayed behind, leaning against a metal column near the loading dock, pretending to tie my boot while the supervisors finished locking paperwork into cabinets. Grant's voice echoed across the aisle. Internal report says her collapse wasn't caused by us. Stress-induced fainting. Nothing structural. Hale responded, HR'll love that phrasing. Rogan added, we can list it as non-work-related incident. No penalty. Grant gave a short chuckle. Exactly. We don't need another mark hurting our KPI profile. They walked away unaware that the words they'd just spoken told me more than they ever intended. Not caused by us. Non-work-related incident. KPI profile. Not once did they say June's name. Not once did they acknowledge she was a human being. I walked out of the warehouse long after they'd gone. The cold air hit hard, sharp on the lungs clean compared to the recycled warehouse atmosphere. I pulled my hood up and kept walking until I reached the far edge of the parking lot where it was dark enough to think. The warehouse wasn't running on labor. It was running on fear. Fear enforced by supervisors who saw people as replaceable. Fear fueled by rules designed to break the spirit long before they broke the body. And I had let this culture grow without knowing it. The realization sat like a weight beneath my ribs. When I returned the next day, the atmosphere felt even tighter. Word of June's collapse had clearly spread, but no one dared speak it out loud. The air held a quiet mourning, one that no one acknowledged but everyone carried. The day shift buzzed faintly in the distance while the night crew trickled in, shoulders, hunched steps, mechanical. They moved like they were sleepwalking into the same nightmare, knowing exactly how it would unfold. Reese walked beside me as though we'd arrived together by accident. He didn't look at me, didn't nod, didn't offer a greeting. But his voice reached me with a quiet edge. They said she shouldn't have slowed down. I didn't answer right away. What did they tell the crew? That she was dehydrated, that it happens, that we have to be more mindful of pace tonight to catch up. Pace. Everything was about pace. The obsession wasn't about efficiency, it was about control. Inside the warehouse, the supervisors had already positioned themselves. Hale stood with a posture of authority, chin raised slightly, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Rogan leaned against the conveyor frame like a sentry. Grant checked his clipboard like he was preparing for war. Their presence tightened everyone's movements before the shift even started. Grant raised his voice. New update. Restroom access is suspended until break. A pulse of dread moved through the crew. No one spoke, but every spine stiffened. He continued, anyone who insists on going will be taken off the roster until further notice. Reese whispered under his breath. They were already doing that. Now they're announcing it. Official, enforced, weaponized. The rule didn't break people physically first. It broke them psychologically. The shift began with harsh efficiency. The machines hummed, boxes thudded. People moved with the forced precision of survival. Not one person drank water. By an hour in, shoulders had tightened across the line. People shifted weight uncomfortably, some clenching their jaws, others working faster just to distract themselves. Halfway through, the first crack formed. A young woman named Mina slowed, one hand pressing against her stomach. She glanced once toward the restroom door, a reflex, nothing more, before returning to work with a rigid posture. Hale noticed instantly. Is there an issue? She asked in a tone that sounded less like concern and more like a dare. No, Mina whispered. Then move faster. Mina nodded quickly and pushed herself too hard. Her movements became jerky, hurried her breathing too shallow. The injustice wasn't loud. It was in the way she didn't even try to fight back. It was in the way everyone else pretended not to see her discomfort. A little later, an older worker named Harvey misjudged his grip. A box slipped, hitting his thigh before landing on the ground. He inhaled sharply from pain. Grant walked over slowly, expression unreadable. You're falling behind. Harvey's voice shook. It's my leg. If you can't meet expectation, Grant said you shouldn't be here at all. Harvey straightened, swallowing pain so hard I could see it in his posture. He lifted the next box with trembling hands. The warehouse had stopped being a workplace. It had become a crucible, and the people inside it were burning. 2 hours into the shift, the pressure finally pushed someone past their limit again. This time a man named Kai. He was pale, sweating eyes, unfocused. He held on to the conveyor edge, his knuckles white. Rogan approached him without adjusting his tone. "You break station, you're gone." Kai's breathing hitched. "I need the restroom." "No." Kai struggled for breath. "It's urgent." "No," Rogan repeated more forcefully this time. Kai's knees buckled. He steadied himself, gripping the metal railing, fighting a losing battle against basic human need. Everyone around him kept working not because they didn't care, but because caring openly would be a risk. The air held an unbearable tension. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. "He doesn't look well." Rogan turned to me, eyes narrowing. "Mind your own station. He's pale, he might faint. Do your job." A wave of cold anger swept through me. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that sharpens your thoughts into something dangerous. I forced myself to keep breathing normally to maintain the undercover facade to stay in control. Kai staggered toward the wall. He didn't make it more than 2 steps before collapsing. The sound of his body hitting the concrete was sharp enough to echo. This time nobody froze. They kept working. The crate line didn't slow. The supervisors didn't rush. The cruelty had become routine. Hale approached him with a clipboard in hand, not kneeling, not checking his pulse. "Unscheduled break," she said flatly. "Mark it. Mark it. Mark it. Mark it." Like his collapse was an inconvenience, not a warning. Grant stepped in front of her. "We're behind already. Call the rotation. Shift people to cover his lane." 2 workers moved Kai's limp body out of the aisle. His shoe scraped along the concrete floor. His head hung loosely. His breathing was shallow, barely visible. I felt something inside me shift again. Not the shock of injustice, not the grief. Something colder, more precise. People weren't collapsing because they were weak. They were collapsing because a rule was designed to push them until their bodies failed. Bathroom access wasn't a policy, it was a weapon. The shift continued, 1 second into another. Workers sweating lips dry movements, rigid tension high. Reese spoke quietly near my shoulder. "This is how it always goes. Happens once or twice a week." "Collapses?" I asked softly. He swallowed, or worse. The phrase lingered in the air between us, heavy and unspoken, its meaning deeper than the words themselves. The next 2 hours were slow, painful. Every time someone winced or stiffened, Hale's eyes tracked them with predatory precision. Rogan's presence behind people made their movements frantic. Grant's silence filled every corner of the warehouse like a poison fog. All around me, small injustices piled into something enormous. A woman holding her breath to endure pain. A man muttering apologies for not moving fast enough. Someone wiping away tears before Hale could see. A worker flinching when Rogan walked too close. Bodies stiffening at the sound of Grant's voice. Glances toward the restroom that never turned into action. No one said the rule out loud again. But the rule didn't need to be said. It lived in every movement. Through the blur of motion, I watched Kai's empty station, the floor where he'd collapsed, the faint marks where his shoes had dragged. No one selected his name, whispered about him, asked where he'd been taken. They pretended nothing happened. Pretending was the only way to survive here. Near the end of the shift, lights flickered for a moment. It wasn't dramatic, just a brief dip that made everyone tense up instinctively like animals reacting to a sudden threat. Grant walked the aisle, expression stern. "Adjust pace. We're making up time." Workers pushed themselves harder. Hale checked her watch, tapping it impatiently. Rogan corrected someone's stance with unnecessary force. Every detail reinforced the same truth that had been growing in my mind since yesterday. These supervisors didn't believe they were doing anything wrong. They believed they were enforcing excellence, and that belief was more dangerous than cruelty alone. The shift ended not with relief, but with the same silence it began with. People filed out like shadows, drained empty, desperate for rest. I stayed for a moment longer, standing near the conveyor belt that had witnessed every collapse, every struggle, every bit of quiet suffering. I didn't feel confusion anymore, or disbelief, or even pure anger. I felt a purpose forming a clarity as sharp as the fluorescent lights above. Because the truth wasn't just visible. It was undeniable, unavoidable. Undeniable to anyone standing in that warehouse long enough to watch bodies fall while supervisors checked clipboards. No matter how quiet the workers were, no matter how carefully the supervisors hid behind rules and numbers, no matter how efficiently the culture disguised itself, the truth was standing right in front of me, showing itself again and again. And I wasn't going anywhere, not while people were collapsing on the concrete, not while fear dictated basic human needs. Not while rules existed specifically to break human beings. Not while this place was built on silence. Each shift revealed more. And the night wasn't through with its revelations. The next morning, the warehouse parking lot felt different. Not quieter silence had always lived here, but heavier, like the ground itself carried the weight of every person who'd collapsed on it. I sat in my car for a full minute before stepping out, watching workers file toward the entrance with the same empty march I'd come to recognize. Some held thermoses, some held nothing. All held the same dread. The company logo on the warehouse wall stared back at me with a clean, polished shine. It didn't belong here. Not with what I'd seen inside. I entered early again, slipping into the building before supervisors arrived. The cafeteria lights buzzed faintly. A few workers sat apart, staring into space, stirring instant coffee without drinking it. Their bodies were present, but their minds were somewhere far away. I walked to the side hallway near the time clock where posters hung, showing smiling workers that didn't exist in this building. Beneath them, a small corkboard had notices pinned in crooked rows. Most were old memos. Some were motivational phrases that meant nothing here. And one was new, a sheet of paper taped unevenly, written in hurried handwriting. "We deserve better. Someone please tell the truth." No signature, no name, just a plea. A quiet cry from someone inside a system that had taught them not to speak. As I stared at that piece of paper, my heart started beating harder. Not from fear, but from recognition. Someone here had tried to ask for help. Someone had tried to reach out before the collapses, before the fear became normal, before walking toward a locked restroom door felt like a crime. Someone had called for help, and no one in management answered. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. I stepped aside, pretending to adjust my gloves just as Hale walked in, heels clicking sharply. She glanced at the board, saw the note, and without hesitation ripped it down. Crumpled it. Tossed it into the trash. Her expression didn't shift, not even slightly. Heat rose behind my ribs. Not anger, not shock, something colder. Erasure. That was the culture here. Erase problems, erase voices, erase the human behind the metrics. I left the hallway before she noticed my eyes on her back. The day shift began with its usual mechanical rhythm. I moved through the aisles quietly, blending into the flow. Workers avoided eye contact. They moved like they were trying to outrun something. The conveyor hum grew louder, drowning out small moments of discomfort, tremors in hands, tight breaths, small winces. A man named Orrin, tall, with thinning hair, approached Hale to request reassignment because his shoulder had been hurting. She barely paused. "If you can lift, you lift. Don't overthink it." He nodded, swallowing whatever pain he'd hoped she'd acknowledge. Nearby, two workers discussed Mateo in whispers, cut off quickly when Grant entered the aisle. Their voices dropped into silence like stones sinking underwater. The supervisors walked the floor with the casual authority of people who believed nothing could touch them. I kept working, observing, listening. At one point, Hale stopped near my station, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "You're faster today," she said, watching me the way someone watches a machine that's performing slightly better than expected. I forced myself to nod, trying to adjust. "Good," she replied. "We don't have room for slow learners." The words were phrased like encouragement, but the tone carried a threat. She walked away before I could answer, her heels clicking a pace that resounded through the aisle. Another hour passed, slow and suffocating. Workers' movements grew heavier. Several people shifted uncomfortably, but none dared request a break. Then it happened. A man named Elliot, broad-shouldered, mid-30s, raised his hand slightly toward Rogan. His face was pale lips, dry jaw clenched tight. "I need the restroom," he said quietly. Rogan didn't look at him. Elliot repeated a little louder. "I need the restroom." Still no response. He tried again. "I'm not well." Nothing. Then Elliot took a step toward the bathroom door. Just one step. Not even a full stride. Rogan snapped. "Back to your station." Elliot froze. Rogan stepped forward. "Don't test me." The warehouse fell into unreal silence. Everyone pretended to work, but all eyes were fixed on Elliot in their peripheral vision. "I can't wait," Elliot whispered. Grant appeared from around the corner. "What's going on?" Rogan answered. "He's trying to break pace." Elliot exhaled shakily. "I'm trying to not pass out." Grant walked up to him slowly, the way someone approaches a malfunctioning device. "You know the rules," Grant said. "Breaks are scheduled." "I don't care about your schedule," Elliot said through clenched teeth. "I need a restroom." The air shifted. A line had been crossed. not by Elliot's need but by his defiance. Grant's voice dropped lower, colder. "If you walk away from your station again, you're off payroll." Elliot stared at him, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Sweat rolled down his temple. His legs trembled. Every worker in that aisle held their breath. Fear had shape. Here it was, in the stiffness of shoulders, the tightening of jaws, the trembling rhythm of movement. Elliot didn't speak again. He didn't move. He just swallowed the pain and returned to his station. 3 minutes later, I heard a faint sound, a strained breath, a quiet choke, the soft thud of cardboard hitting the floor. Elliot dropped to his knees. His hand clutched the side of a crate, fingers trembling violently. His vision blurred, unfocused, unfixed. His body rocked forward. This time, workers reacted first. A woman beside him reached out instinctively before pulling back, fear stopping her from touching him. Others took small steps toward him, then froze mid-motion as Grant barked, "Stay at your stations!" Everyone flinched. Elliot collapsed fully. His body curled on its side arms, shaking forehead pressed to the concrete. He gasped once, a sound that cut through the conveyor hum. My instincts surged, but I forced myself still. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I needed to see how far they would let this go. Rogan walked toward him, not fast, not with urgency, but with the cold detachment of someone inspecting damaged equipment. He nudged Elliot's shoulder with the back of his knuckles. "Get up." Elliot didn't move. Grant folded his arms. "He's done for the day. Put him on suspended status." Suspended, not because he collapsed, but because he had dared to need something. Hale added, "We can dock his hours retroactively." Retroactively, docking wages for losing consciousness. No one blinked. No one questioned it. 2 workers dragged Elliot toward the exit door. His shoes scraped the ground in slow, dragging patterns. His fingers twitched weakly, trying to hold on to anything that anchored him to consciousness. As they disappeared around the corner, the air filled with a collective breath workers didn't even realize they'd been holding. Grant clapped his hands sharply, back on pace. People obeyed instantly, except one, Reese. His eyes lingered on the door where Elliot had been taken. A quiet sorrow settled over his features, too brief to draw attention, too deep to ignore. I leaned slightly toward him. "Is it always like this?" Reese swallowed hard. "This is normal?" Normal. That word dug into me deeper than any collapse I'd witnessed. Normal meant it wasn't an exception. Normal meant it wasn't spontaneous. Normal meant it was designed. Every rule, every punishment, every denial, every collapse, all designed. Something inside me shifted, solidified, aligned with a purpose that had been forming since the first moment I stepped into this place. My undercover visit had begun as an investigation. It was turning into something else, something that had no room for hesitation, no room for restraint, no room for doubt. Because these collapses weren't accidents. They weren't isolated. They were warnings. Warnings. The warehouse had been trying to deliver through bodies hitting the floor, through voices whispering in fear, through notes being ripped from bulletin boards, through supervisors whose eyes held no humanity. Warnings for anyone willing to see them. And I was seeing everything now. I arrived earlier than usual the next day. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but inside my chest something felt hotter than anger. Something steadier tightened into a single line of focus. I walked toward the entrance as workers moved past me with the same rhythm of exhaustion, the same deadened steps, the same silence that had become the soundtrack of this place. But there was something different today. Not loud, not visible, just tense. Every pair of eyes looked more hollow. Every movement held a tremor beneath the surface. Every inhale felt like someone bracing for impact. Inside the cafeteria, people didn't bother faking casual conversations anymore. They sat in scattered clusters, sipping nothing, staring at nothing, waiting for the next inevitable collapse. Reese walked in late. He usually arrived early, checking machines before supervisors appeared. Today, his jacket hung off one shoulder hair, disheveled like he hadn't slept at all. He dropped into a chair across from me, hands clasped tightly between his knees. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, Reese whispered Elliot didn't come home last night. The words hit with a weight I wasn't prepared for. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. His roommate said he hasn't answered his phone. They called the hospital. No record. Reese's voice shook despite how hard he tried to steady it. He didn't show up at the clinic either. "Has anyone heard anything?" "Nothing." He rubbed a hand over his face. People go missing from this place more often than you think. The cafeteria light buzzed overhead, flickering just once, but neither of us looked up. They disappear from schedules, Reese said quietly. They disappear from rosters. Paperwork shows they quit, but no one hears from them again. I stared at him. Are you saying? I'm saying I don't know. His voice cracked. But no one looks for them. No one in charge cares where they go. A cold wave rolled through me sharper than anything I'd felt in this building. Not because of what he said, but because of what it implied. This warehouse didn't just break people. It erased them. Quietly. Systematically. Before I could respond, a loud snap echoed from the hallway. Hale's voice followed. Everyone floor now. Workers stood immediately, a mix of fear and reflex. We filed out of the cafeteria into the main warehouse, where the supervisors were already arranged in a line, Hale, Rogan, and Grant all standing with stiff posture. Grant held a tablet against his chest. His expression was cold, composed, unnervingly calm. We're conducting a surprise assessment tonight, he announced. An assessment. Not to improve conditions, not to address safety, but to enforce compliance. Grant continued. Corporate is pushing for higher throughput. That means no delays, no excuses, no deviations. Corporate. The word made my jaw tighten. He was invoking authority higher than his own to justify cruelty. Hale added, this includes full suspension of restroom use until end of shift. Several workers inhaled sharply. One woman pressed a hand to her stomach. Reese stiffened beside me. Grant's voice cut through the tension. If you cannot comply, step forward now. No one moved. Not because compliance felt possible, but because defiance was dangerous. Grant nodded as if their silence was agreement. Stations now. We scattered back into the aisles. The machines roared to life with a violence that felt intentional, like the gears were grinding down not just boxes, but the people operating them. I took my place on the line, lifting, stacking, moving. But today, something in the warehouse felt different. Volatile, stretched thin, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. The supervisors spread out watching us with hawk-like precision. Every movement was scrutinized. Every hesitation earned a glare. Every breath felt monitored. 2 hours in the first sign of trouble surfaced. A woman named Larissa, thin, mid-40s eyes, always rimmed with fatigue, pressed a hand to her abdomen, wincing. She whispered something to the worker beside her, who looked away quickly, terrified of being associated with trouble. Larissa took a shaky step toward the restroom door. Hale saw her instantly. Back to station. Larissa didn't move. Hale walked toward her, posture stiff. You heard me. Larissa swallowed. Please, I can't wait. Hale stepped closer. Return to station or you're done. Larissa didn't back away. She didn't nod. She didn't obey. She stood frozen, caught between fear of the rule and fear of her own body. Her breathing was sharp, uneven. Her hands trembled. Her face went white. I'm begging you, she whispered. Hale's eyes hardened. You need to learn discipline. That was it. That was the sentence that broke something. Larissa buckled forward suddenly, hands gripping her knees, her entire body shaking. A low sound escaped her, half-gasp, half-cry. She tried to straighten but couldn't. Her body simply refused. Reese dropped his box instinct, kicking before fear could stop him. Let her go, he said. Hale snapped back to work. Reese stood his ground, not with anger, but with something that looked like grief and resolve intertwined. She's going to collapse. Then she collapses, Hale said. That sentence cut through the warehouse like a blade. Larissa's legs buckled. She dropped to the floor, body folding in on itself, hands clutching her stomach. Her forehead touched the concrete. A choked whimper escaped her. Everything froze. The conveyor kept moving, but the world around it stopped. Rogan rushed over not to help, but to block workers from approaching. Grant appeared behind him, jaw tight, eyes cold. What's her name? Grant asked. Rogan shrugged. Lar something. They didn't even know. Grant waved his hand. Schedule her off the roster. Mark her as inactive. Inactive. Not collapsed, not injured, not in medical need. Inactive. Workers stared at Larissa, their faces twisted with helplessness. No one dared kneel. No one dared speak. The rule forbade it. Reese took half a step forward before I caught his sleeve. Don't. My voice was steady, quiet, controlled. He turned toward me, eyes brimming with a fury he didn't dare express. They're killing people, he whispered. I held his gaze. I know. He looked like he wanted to scream, or break something, or cry, or all three. But he didn't. Because breaking down was dangerous in this place. 2 workers dragged Larissa out of the aisle. One held her under the arms while her legs dragged limply behind her. Her fingertips brushed the floor. Her shoes left faint streaks. She didn't speak, didn't fight, didn't even lift her head. A quiet horror spread through the room, not loud, not chaotic. Just quiet, deep, heavy, like grief settling over a grave. I felt something click inside me, not a thought, a decision. The collapses weren't isolated incidents. The denial of basic needs wasn't mismanagement. The silence wasn't a symptom. This warehouse wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed. As Larissa disappeared through the door, Grant clapped once, returned to pace. The sentence was sickening in its normalcy. Everyone obeyed with movements that looked mechanical, but their eyes betrayed something deeper, a look that said they had crossed their own breaking point too. They were compliant, yes. They followed rules, yes. But inside something had cracked. The next hour moved in a blur of motion and suppressed panic. People moved too fast, too rigidly, too desperately. Minor mistakes multiplied. A crate toppled from a stack and nearly hit a worker's shoulder. A man sliced his finger and wrapped it in his sleeve, terrified of being seen. Someone gagged quietly behind their station, refusing to abandon their post. And the supervisors did nothing but watch. At one point, Grant walked past me, muttering into his radio, "If one more person drops, we'll do a full roster sweep. A full roster sweep, firing everyone slower, weaker, sicker, replacing them with new bodies, disposable bodies." My entire undercover purpose sharpened into a new form. This wasn't about observing anymore. It wasn't about documentation. It wasn't about reconciling facts with reports. This was about the human cost of a rule that wasn't just unjust, it was lethal. About an hour before end of shift, something unexpected happened. A small noise, barely audible. A soft ping like metal tapping glass. Reese looked down. A phone had slipped from someone's crate. Not broken, just unlocked enough to reveal a partially typed message on the screen. A message addressed to an unknown number. "Please help us, people are collapsing. No one listens. Someone has to listen." Someone had been trying to send this message. Someone had reached the breaking point long before today. Someone had tried to cry out into the world beyond this warehouse. Reese read the screen. His breath caught. "That's not mine," he whispered. It fell from Larissa's crate, someone behind us murmured. The phone's edges were dented. The back was cracked. It had been dropped more than once. I read the screen again. The exact fear, the exact desperation, the exact cry for help. It matched the one anonymous note from weeks ago. It matched the note on the bulletin board. It matched the collapses. It matched everything. I felt my throat tighten, not with sadness, but with something clearer. Resolve. The warehouse wasn't a mystery anymore. It wasn't a puzzle to decode. It was a crime scene, one happening in real time. And I didn't need more evidence. I had enough, more than enough. But the shift didn't pause. It didn't slow. Boxes kept moving. Supervisors kept watching. Workers kept suffering. And Larissa's phone kept glowing with a message she never got to send. As I placed the next crate on the stack, the words on that screen burned into my mind. Someone has to listen, and that someone was standing right here. Something shifted the moment Larissa's phone slipped into our aisle. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the kind of shift that happens inside people's eyes, a small flicker that says enough. The warehouse kept roaring, but underneath the noise, a thread of defiance began weaving itself between workers. Subtle, unspoken, fragile, but growing. Grant and the supervisors circled the floor like they owned oxygen. Hale walked past each aisle with the same stiff shoulders, scanning for hesitation, for weakness, for anyone foolish enough to break the rule again. People moved fast, not because they believed in the rule, but because they were terrified of becoming the next body dragged across the concrete. I lifted another crate. The strain in my arms was nothing compared to the weight in my chest. Every detail I'd seen since stepping into this warehouse had been heavy, but today it was different. Today, the truth finally showed its teeth. Across from me, Reese had gone silent. Not the quiet from exhaustion silence. This one was sharper, tighter, like a lid clamped down over boiling anger. His eyes flicked between Larissa's phone and the supervisors who pretended nothing happened. "You know what's messed up," he muttered under his breath. "When someone collapses, they don't even call it an injury. They call it non-compliance." The words weren't emotional, just dry, cold, factual. The kind of truth that hurts more because of how plain it is. Someone behind us whispered, "They marked Elliot as voluntarily resigned. He never came back for his things." Another voice added, "They erased Daniela last month. She fainted twice. They said she failed performance expectations." Workers weren't speaking loudly, but they were speaking for the first time. Fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply found competition, the need to be heard. Grant's radio crackled in the distance. Roster sweep at next interval if pacing doesn't stabilize. Pacing, as if humans were machine parts. I watched him from across the aisle. His face didn't reveal cruelty. It revealed something worse, indifference. He didn't see the warehouse as people. He saw inputs and outputs, obstacles and metrics, compliance and non-compliance. That kind of coldness was more dangerous than rage. A worker named Jonah dropped a box when his hands started shaking too badly to grip. The noise echoed louder than it should have. Hale snapped toward him immediately. "Pick it up," Hale barked. Jonah tried. The box slipped from his hands again. His eyes stayed glued to the floor. Hale stepped closer. "Pick it up or step aside. We can replace you by morning." The sentence made the room exhale as if stabbed in the same place. Replace you. That was the phrase that defined everything in this warehouse. Not discipline, not structure, not efficiency. Replaceable. Hale took another step. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice was low, even. More threatening because of how calm it was. "Are you hearing me?" Jonah finally whispered. "My hands, they won't stop shaking." Hale leaned in. "Then you shouldn't have slowed pace earlier." A sharp chill went through every aisle. Grant and Rogan were watching now. Not because they cared, because they wanted to see what Hale would do with a weak link. I took a step forward instinctively. Reese grabbed my arm. "Don't. They'll target you next." He wasn't wrong. But I wasn't stepping forward because of impulse. I was stepping forward because something about Jonah's expression didn't sit right. He looked beyond fear. He looked empty. His breathing was uneven, his gaze unfocused, his hands trembling faster. Something inside him was unraveling. Hale opened his mouth to threaten him again. Then Jonah whispered something so quiet the machines nearly drowned it out. "I haven't eaten in 21 hours. Everything around us stilled." Hale blinked. "What did you say?" Jonah lifted his eyes barely, and for the first time emotion cracked through his numbed expression. "I got written up yesterday for taking too long in the break room, so I didn't eat before the shift. I couldn't be late again." Someone behind us muttered. He wasn't late. He was dizzy. But Jonah kept speaking in a monotone voice. "If I get another write-up, I'll lose my job. I can't lose it. My mother needs medication. If I lose this job, she doesn't get it." It wasn't a plea, it was a confession, a final one. Hale wasn't moved, not even slightly. "This is a workplace, not a charity. You follow policy or you go home." Jonah's voice broke. "If I go home, she dies." A silence heavier than any noise settled over us. Hale's voice dropped into something sharp. "That is not my problem." Something in Jonah's face collapsed at those words the same way Larissa's body had. He didn't fall physically, but the way he lowered his eyes told me something inside him had reached its breaking point. And something inside me did too. The next moment wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't heroic. It was simple. Jonah walked past Hale without a word, heading toward the restroom. Slowly, mechanically, like a man who had nothing left to lose. Hale blocked his path. "Where do you think you're going?" Jonah didn't answer. Hale grabbed his arm. "That's when the warehouse changed." Reese said, "Let him go." Another worker repeated, "Let him go." Another, "He's not well." Another, "Stop touching him." Voices rising, not shouting, but stacking, one on top of another, stronger because of how steady they were. Workers stepped closer, forming a loose arc around Jonah. Hale looked at Grant for backup. Grant's jaw tightened, but he didn't intervene. For the first time, I saw it fear. Not from workers, from management. They didn't fear rebellion. They feared attention. Hale released Jonah's arm. But the damage was done. Every worker had seen the moment Hale realized he lost control. Jonah walked to the restroom without turning back. No one stopped him. No one dared. When he closed the door, the warehouse stood frozen, not silent, not noisy. Just aware. Deeply aware. Grant stepped forward, face locked in a stiff expression. "This facility is not responsible for personal issues." The expectation, he didn't finish. A loud thud cut him off. The door Jonah walked through had swung open again, but this time Jonah wasn't standing. He was unconscious, crumpled halfway in the doorway. The entire warehouse inhaled at the same time. No one moved for a fraction of a second. Then someone whispered, "Call an ambulance." Another voice, "Get help." Another, "He's not breathing right." Hale took a step, but froze when he realized every worker was staring at him. Waiting, judging, watching. He turned pale. Rogan pulled out his radio, but before he could say anything, Reese rushed forward, kneeling beside Jonah. He tilted Jonah carefully, checking his breathing. "He's breathing, but shallow," Reese said. "We need real medics." Grant hesitated. He didn't want emergency services here. It meant documentation. It meant reports. It meant scrutiny. It meant someone outside this building would ask questions they couldn't bury. Workers watched him. Grant swallowed. More eyes, more pressure, more witnesses. He finally muttered, "Fine. Call." Hale radioed, voice flat. Workers stepped aside as if air itself was suddenly thinner. As they opened a path to the front entrance, I watched Jonah's limp body on the floor. His fingers still trembled faintly, his breathing shallow, his lips pale. The warehouse didn't look like a workplace anymore. It looked like the aftermath of something that had been rotting for years. I didn't feel anger, not sadness, not fear, just clarity. Every collapse, every write-up, every silent cry, every worker erased without a name. All of it was systemic. All of it was intentional. All of it was preventable. And now there would be no hiding, because paramedics were about to step into a warehouse full of the truth. And the truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was lying unconscious on the floor for everyone to see.